KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.
Special guest today with us, Johnny's sister, Mary Beckham. Welcome, Mary.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be back.
It's good to have you back, honey. So on this part, the second half, we want to recap a little bit right now from the first show. Johnny, age 33, of Parker, Arizona, was murdered this past June. Johnny was a kind-hearted, good person. He loved dogs and animals. He rescued animals, and he was a big dog lover. And he also was a type of person who was just a friendly person who, if somebody needed a hand, he would be there to give them a hand. His dad, my brother, Jody, was like that, and so was his Grandpa Dickie. He was the same way. They were mechanics. They worked on vehicles. Johnny learned the trait from his dad, and my brother learned the trait from our dad. And just my brother and my dad grew up in a time where there weren't cell phones, so they were out. If you seen somebody who needed a hand alongside of the road, they would help them. And living out in Parker, you'd often see that. So people would break down or a boat would break down, and Johnny would be there to help them. So he was that type of guy. So just to give you a little feeling for the person that he was. Unfortunately, Johnny got into use of some Oxycontin after he was in a car accident. It was a pretty serious car accident when he was 18 years old, and that progressed on to, we believe, harder drugs. We noticed some changes in Johnny when he was about 24 with nodding out and things like that. So, but he was a very talented young man. He liked to draw and tattoo, and he also liked to write. He wrote some poetry, so you'll get a taste of that today because we're going to let you hear some of his poems today. So we're excited to be able to do that. He also liked to write music, and he did a little rapping with his cousin Bobby. That's what they like to do. He was a father of a little boy named Bobby, age 9, and also he was a son, a brother, and a nephew. When Johnny was 33, he passed away, and it was a month after his grandma passed away. And his grandma was really a big part of his life because she helped raise him, and he really had a close bond with Grandma Margie. So
your mom?
My mom. So at this point in his life, he was really sad about the loss of his grandma, and also not just that. He was at a place in his life, unfortunately, where he wasn't really close with his family at that point, and it wasn't any fault of his own, anything he had done to his family. It was what he was doing to himself that his family had to kind of withdraw from him a little bit. So we've seen that in some of his messages to other people, and we also heard from people that he was feeling really isolated and alone at this time in his life. So that's just a little bit of background on what was going on in his mind.
Yeah, and that's where the addiction takes you. So
yeah, and Alyssa has experience with that, so she knows that that's kind of, people kind of have to protect themselves. Obviously,
right.
when someone's using, you have to protect yourself.
Right.
And so
you can't enable
them, right?
That makes it worse.
And you're always hopeful that if you do isolate from them, that maybe that'll bring them to the end of the road quicker or to rock bottom more quickly.
Right.
I mean, we always hope for that. Nobody really wants to separate themselves from their loved ones.
Right.
So it was June 29th in Parker. It was a kind of a gloomy night, and it was 1 month after his grandma had passed, but it was also 2 days after her funeral. And at her funeral, we had put out some seeds at his grandma Margie's funeral, at my mom's funeral, for people to take. And there was like a little table, and then they could plant them. Do you remember that, Alyssa?
Yeah, I wanted to, I bought the flowers on Amazon in bulk because I wanted everybody to be able to have something in memory of her. And so I also got these pennies from heaven with the little crosses carved out of them, and I had them all on the table. And I saw Johnny come in, and I told him, hey, look, on the table right there, there's some flowers, and there's all different kinds of flowers. And so you can go ahead and grab some of those.
There were seeds, right?
Yeah, flower seeds, so that you could plant them for Grandma. And also some pennies from heaven. And I gave him one of the pennies, and then I walked away and I looked over at one point and I saw Johnny standing there and he was going through the flowers and he was picking a bunch of them, just all different kinds that he wanted. And he took his time. I remember him specifically just sitting there and looking and making sure he got the right ones that he wanted for Grandma. And we ended up going to his house after he had passed away. And we were moving his stuff, trying to move some of his valuable things out of his house because we had heard that some people were going to break into his house during his funeral and steal his stuff. So the day before that happened, we went in to get a bunch of his valuables and move them. And I had found a bunch of the packets that he had of the flowers, the seeds. And sitting with it was this little Post-it note, and it had something that he had written, and he must have written it within the 2 days.
You actually heard from after you posted it. You heard from the girl that he was seeing.
Yeah, that he wrote it, right? Yeah,
that he had wrote it. Yeah,
right.
She was
after.
with him.
Yeah, and this is what it said. The barrel of the Ruger produced a miniature synthetic solar eclipse as the 9mm round spiraled out, cutting the air like a boat propeller in water, creating a wave of chaos birthed through the explicit bang of the gunpowder, a handheld powerhouse of raw, unforgiving energy, creating and destroying. And yeah, just being, I don't know, finding that, and it just kind of it shocked me, especially, what happened.
It's a little prophetic, I think.
Right.
Yeah, it's very sad, and we should put a warning out there for anyone who's listening that there is some graphic content. Sorry, anyone who's listening. All right, so let's get back into our story where we left off. Maybe Mary, if you can pick up where we left off. I think we were basically at the part like we had just left from talking to the neighbor.
Yeah, we talked to the neighbor across the street. He gave us some good insight, but then after that we went to the police station, and we were talking to an officer there, and we got some answers, and it gave us a bit of comfort. The officer told us which sheriff was the first on scene at Johnny's, where the crime occurred. And then any of the police officers that did show up after that were just there to assist the main sheriff and the fire department because the main sheriff got the call first. We were directed to go to the sheriff's department and talk to the first on scene officer to get more information. And we were strongly encouraged to ask more questions to make sure that, we get the answers, we get the real answers, and we get justice for Johnny. And then we gave the police officer some information, or our information, to get a hold of us. And so we could get police reports and all that good stuff.
I remember that. It was interesting to me because it's a little confusing when you're the average citizen and you haven't dealt with a lot of law enforcement, and so you're not really sure where to go. And initially, we went to the police officers, the police department rather, and then we found out that we were actually supposed to be at the sheriff department because the sheriffs was their jurisdiction rather. So it's kind of interesting. So now we have a lot of players. We kind of have like the police officers, but then we also have the sheriff's department, and the sheriff's department was the first on scene. So it was kind of interesting to me. And then what with all that, and at that point, so then we went over to the sheriff's department, and we spoke with the sheriff there. I believe we spoke with Poindexter. Do you recall that?
Yeah. It was my first time meeting Poindexter. He told us, or he confirmed who the first sheriff was that responded to Johnny. And he told us that he worked graveyard, so he wasn't there. He wasn't available for us to talk to. We were encouraged to provide our information so he can contact us on his next shift, which I would assume would be later that day. Poindexter seemed nice, but he also seemed pretty confused about where that responding officer, like what his position was in the department. because when he was talking to us, he kept switching from detective to sergeant, which just was confusing for us and apparent in him.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but we asked him a series of questions, and I don't think he was comfortable giving us a definitive answer. We asked him stuff like, why would it be considered self-inflicted if there was no weapon around him?
Right.
He replied saying, we never assume it is self-inflicted, and he later confirmed that the call came in as shots fired. Then we asked him what his protocol, or what their protocol is for a victim with a gunshot wound, and we were told it depended where he was and what he was doing. I'm not sure. I'm assuming
I
he's
remember
talking
I
that.
about
remember
Johnny.
that too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, was he talking about Johnny or the officer? I don't know, but
That was
and
confusing.
It was.
that's strange in itself.
Yeah.
I would assume your protocol would be to, tend to the victim.
Maybe
that's
render
bleeding
aid or
out on the
something.
ground.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. But just the
Right.
fact that he couldn't even tell us what their policies and procedures were regarding that issue was really bothersome. It was like,
Yeah.
huh? And then it seemed like he wasn't, I don't really know how to say it. I think he seemed a little bit either confused or maybe defensive. And that
It
was
sounded
that was
defensive to
frustrating.
me, but
Yeah.
Yeah, he might have been anxious to give us a wrong answer, or maybe to. I
Yeah.
think that might, because we did go in there very, like,
Guns
what is
blazing.
going on? Why? Because we were scared,
Right. Right.
But yeah, so and then he at one point said that when the responding sheriff showed up on scene, he must have been confused because he said that the victim, my brother Johnny, was already being transported and wrapped up before the sheriff showed up.
Yep.
I
I
guess
remember.
he thought medical was there prior to the responding, legit first responding officer.
Right. Yeah. He was confused about that detail. And then he also gave us another detail where he, I think, thought he got the 911 caller confused with the actually with Johnny. So he actually, it was like right after it happened, to be fair. It was like right after.
Yeah,
The
no,
next
that
day.
is fair. But it did seem like he had time to listen to the 911 call or something like that. So, but I agree. Yeah, that is fair.
Yeah.
He also assured us that the narcotics unit is already in contact with their informants to get more information, which I felt like was odd. I feel like I don't know. I don't know how that works, but how there's no immediate, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't anything that directly led to drugs. So why would?
Why was
right.
the
But
task force involved already? Right.
right, they just assumed. I'm assuming.
Right.
And then he said that there's a lot of leads coming in, and that Darren's name was being dropped and brought up a lot with these calls. So it seems like he was pursuing Darren as far as, a suspect, because that was what everybody was running around saying. Everybody was saying that Darren was, the one who was seen
Right.
at Johnny's. He, we asked him how we could get a hold of the body cam, because we were suspicious of the self-inflicted. We were also told that the officer didn't tend to Johnny for a while. And we were told that the sheriff did have his body cam on, and it'll give us some answers, but it'll be a couple weeks, and because it's part of an active investigation, which gave us comfort. At least there was body cam, so we can get the truth. And then there was a confusion about how many 911 calls there were. He thought there was one originally, and it was a man named Brian M. Well, we're going to call him Brian M. But there was also, if you remember from the last episode, the neighbor across the street had mentioned that he also called 911.
Right.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying, yeah, and that was a little confusing because to us, at that point, the only person who called 911, in our opinion, was the person that we had spoke to, the neighbor that we had spoke to. But then now we're standing in front of this detective, and he's saying, "Oh no, somebody else also called 911, Brian M."
Right.
And we're like, "Huh?" But it makes sense because the person we spoke to said he was on the phone with 911, and the police were already showing up before he even, right after he called. So it does make sense.
Right, I remember that. Yeah, he assured us that it was going to be handled and they were going to go through all that information. And we asked, you remember when we asked them if they had spoken to the witness? I would assume he would be called a witness. He heard the gunshot, he heard somebody yell, and then he went over to check on Johnny, right? He also saw Theron. He thought he saw Theron, and so I would say he's a witness. And then there was also Johnny's girlfriend at the time was on her way to see him and also the last to speak to Johnny. So, and she was there. She walked up when the cops were there. So,
And she was never interviewed.
And
she was never interviewed.
Yeah. So I asked them if she was interviewed, and they said they're not sure, but they'll make sure that they do, and they didn't.
No, and then we asked them later on in that the group Zoom meeting, if they had interviewed her, and they said they hadn't. And we asked, or why not? Why haven't you interviewed her? And if she was there, she was one of the last people to talk to him, and they didn't have an answer for us. And they said she's not. What was the word that they used? It's not relevant to the case.
Yeah, they said it wasn't relevant. However, they did say at one point, "Oh yes, well, we took her statement." And I said, "Well, how?" Because according to her, you've not taken her statement. And they said, "Oh, that night, and it was recorded." I said, "How was it recorded?" And he said the dash cam or something like that. It was really strange. I mean, if I recall right. But then he said that it's not relevant. It's like, well, if she's the last person to talk to him, pretty much, other than the people who were involved or who were there or whatever. But she was like the person texting him, going there to meet him. Why would you not talk to her?
Right.
Go on, Mary. Sorry.
Exactly. And I think that just kind of confirms that they, assuming that it has to do with drugs, because they didn't want information, is what it sounds like. They just, wanted to paint it as whatever they wanted to paint it as.
That's kind of how it looked, yeah.
Yeah. And then lastly, we mentioned that there was a retired LAPD officer that lived directly across the street from Johnny's house. And we noticed when we were over there talking to the across the street neighbor that there was cameras pointing towards Johnny's house. And so when I brought that up, Point Dexter said, we'll look into it, but it seemed like he kind of wanted to discourage us from hoping that those cameras were useful, because he said, I have cameras all around my house too. They're not necessarily pointing towards the street, just kind of overlooking my driveway.
Right.
So it really seemed like he just wanted, I don't know. I don't know if he didn't want us to know that, or if he really just didn't want us to be hopeful about that.
Right, yeah. And then there was cameras at Johnny's house too that really ended up not providing anything, but that was interesting too, because they were pointed right at the scene.
All of it was just weird.
That was really unfortunate because it was even hooked up, and the only thing that would have had to be done was there had to be a hard drive inside of the monitor, right? And if somebody went into the house, at any point after Johnny got shot, or
which we heard that somebody had broken into his house right after.
Right. Yeah. And so that's what I'm saying is all they had to do was take the hard drive out, and then there's no more information, because I don't think he had it hooked up to a cloud or something. I don't think that was possible. So that was really unfortunate.
Yeah, it was. So Mary, how long did it take for the first on-scene sheriff to get in contact with you?
Oh, I'm still waiting on that phone call. I haven't heard from him.
Oh, you're still waiting. I see. Uh-huh.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So at one point, I think it was probably about 48 hours after all of this happened, I was upset. I remember being upset, and I remember that...
Really quick, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Mary.
I remember very distinctively, I remember you were very anxious about the first 48 hours, and you kept telling me the first 48 hours are
The most important.
crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And
it's,
yeah. Yeah.
Yep, it's true.
And that's where I was going. Yeah. I mean, that's
It's almost like it was prolonged intentionally.
it was.
So either so somebody could get away or so that evidence could be hidden.
Well, and also
That's what it felt like.
when we look back at
I agree.
like the house, Johnny's house. I mean, if you're really looking for somebody, why was his computer like on open to his Facebook account? We could read all his messages. No one ever came to get that. Why didn't anybody ever come back to this scene until like days and days later? There's a lot of questionable stuff that went on. Nobody came to search the house. Nobody, they allowed somebody else to come inside the house right after it happened.
Were there
which
ever fingerprints even
strange.
taken?
No,
Nothing.
Not
And
that
this
we
is
know
a
of.
murder.
Not that
This
we
is a
know of.
murder.
Right. None of that stuff happened. So it's very strange. But I was like starting to get anxious at this point after the 48-hour mark. And I was upset because I know that my family members had tried to contact the first officer on scene. And at this point, we also knew that there was a rumor that he had said that Johnny was the POS and that he was going to deem it self-inflicted. And he basically was just glad that Johnny wasn't around. So I was like really anxious and thinking, okay, so from what we were hearing, he hadn't, no one had really been, the police hadn't contacted anybody. And we were hearing, from the neighbor and from a couple of neighbors that they thought it was Theron and they thought they seen him. But they called the police and the police hadn't got back to them or the sheriff. And then we heard that, the girlfriend hadn't been interviewed and she told us she hadn't been interviewed, So there was a lot on my mind at this point. Actually, I don't think I talked to the girlfriend at this point yet, though. But I did call the sheriff-elect, whose name is Ponce, William Ponce, and that was about within the 48-hour mark. And he said to me, him and his deputy that was there with him, they were trying to make heads or tails of the 911 call, which I don't know what that means. So I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's really jumbled. It's hard to understand. We're trying to figure out, like, what's being said on the 911 call. And I was like, okay, but none of these witnesses have been interviewed, and it's now 48 hours, and, what's going on? And he, like, just reassured me, really, like, reassured me, it's going to be okay. We're going to get new detectives on the case. It's going to be fine. I mean, to the point where, like, I just broke down and cried because I was like, okay, finally someone's going to help us, but I was skeptical because so far nothing was really getting done as far as I was concerned, as far as the case was concerned. And I know my niece had tried to call, Miranda had tried to call, to speak with the responding sheriff that was there that night. So that was like really upsetting to me. But we couldn't really get any definitive answers at this point as to any of our questions really. And so we were really kind of concerned about the progress of the case.
Yeah, I remember. I don't even think we had detectives. Like, we didn't know the detectives. We didn't know that they were assigned. We didn't know anything. But then we did get a little bit of progress from that. And since we were in contact with Sheriff Ponce, he did end up giving the case over to two detectives on July 5th.
Oh,
I
that's
finally
right.
heard that my sister, she told us that the detectives are on this case. She met him. She's like, let them do their job. And so we were hopeful, but we still had, some concerns.
Right. I remember that. And it was July 5th. I think that might have been the day that they went back out to Johnny's house and started to finally, like, scrape his blood off the ground.
Which is how many days after he actually got shot. It's crazy.
And it rained.
Yeah, it was 4 days after he was shot. You could say 5 because Johnny was shot, the last day of June, and then he ended up passing away the next morning. And they were mostly there, I believe, to talk to the neighbor across the street about his cameras, which ended up being, they said, what did they say?
They said that the cameras weren't pointed towards his house.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's what basically they said. And Miranda was there, I think, when the detectives were there and they told them that. Yeah. I started getting worried too at this point. Oh, we have a caller? Oh, interesting. Okay, can you hold for a minute, Mary? We're going to take a call.
Of course.
Okay. Hi, you're on. You're on air.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm listening to you online from up in San Francisco. We've got a section of town here called the Tenderloin, and apparently the deaths by fentanyl are, exceedingly stupid. And I noticed that there have been, fentanyl production is just continuous.
Right.
And I out here in the Haight-Ashbury, I went to a speech once by some famous Haight-Ashbury, elders, I guess you'd call them, and they were describing that in the very beginning, the drugs were created by people who actually used them. The ones that were produced, the LSD and things like that, were produced, and since the people actually used them, they wanted to have good quality. But once the money got involved, the producers who didn't necessarily use them, probably didn't use them, they just wanted the money. They didn't care about the quality of it. And so I'm just looking at this whole issue of fentanyl. How is it that somebody can just produce gallons and gallons of something that's just a notorious poison? And, it's as if there's no ethics to the producers.
Right.
And so I'm just kind of raising it from that angle. We've got to go after these producers. I remember hearing once about cocaine production down in Colombia, and that Exxon, let's see, I think it was, it's not esters. I'm trying to think of the chemical that's used in not benzene, but Exxon, the oil company, Exxon, was the one that produced it, and for the total amount of tonnage or gallons or huge quantities that were delivered down to Colombia, only about 10% of it was used in gasoline or nail polish, and that 90% of it was used in production of cocaine.
Wow.
Wow, yeah. Yikes. Okay. Wow, that's terrible. We will be having somebody on in a future episode who's actually she's actually got a campaign herself against fentanyl, and she has a story to tell about fentanyl and fentanyl addiction. So we appreciate your call. Have a good day. Have a good day.
Sure. Yeah. Well, people trying to get one thing, but they end up with fentanyl too. It's not necessarily a knowing addiction. It's that they accidentally run onto it.
Alyssa, what do you think about that? I know my daughter has told me in the past that sometimes they look for fentanyl. Is that correct?
It's something that I used to look for personally, and I know a couple of other people that have as well, just because it's something that you don't have to take as much of, and you can end up getting really high off of it, and you don't have to pay as much money, but you have to be really, really careful with it because it is so strong. But there are people that it's getting mixed in with their meth. It's getting mixed in with their heroin, and they're dying from it. It's true. It does happen by accident, but also there are people who do go out and look for it.
Yeah, well, like I was saying, the issue about people who used to create high-quality stuff because they were the users of it, but now it's gotten into these money types who don't use it themselves, and they don't care where it goes. They just want the money.
Right.
Yeah, it's big money. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think there definitely needs to be
hi, Mary.
some more repercussions on people who produce it, but I only see people or, law enforcement going after the people who use,
Right.
Right. And I can't really speak to that because I'm not sure, but it's a very unfortunate situation. And we're gonna get back now to Johnny's story. But we appreciate your
Hey,
call,
thanks.
and
Yeah.
please listen in because we will in the future. We are having someone come on and talk about fentanyl. It's going to be soon, probably within the next month.
Yeah, she has a clothing company, F Fentanyl Dealers. So.
Yeah, she does. Okay.
Yeah, well, stay safe. Thanks.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Have a good day. Well, that was
Okay.
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, Mary, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Thanks for your comment. We appreciate you. Um, that was an unexpected call, but that was kind of a nice little a little break for a minute.
It's a good perspective as well. I don't think it's one that we've looked at.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. It is. Okay, so we were talking about. I think we were. Oh, I got to find out where we were at. I think we were
We
just.
were talking about you being anxious
Oh, yeah.
because
Go ahead.
we were going to go on with the cremation process.
Yeah, and I was getting anxious over the cremation process because I was wondering, like, is it still, have they still deemed this self-inflicted? Is that still in the death report that Johnny's death was self-inflicted, and I was really kind of worried about that. So I went down to, let me back up one step though. Before this happened, I actually emailed Detective Ponce because things were still moving very slowly, and I was really kind of concerned. So I emailed him and let him know that we have a family member who's a district attorney out in LA County, out in LA, and I let him know that he would be helping us with in the future. And so he responded and said that we could all meet with the team of detectives in the future. But the family member was out of town, so we couldn't do it right away. But at any rate, so I went out to Parker for the viewing because I knew Johnny's mom was going to be there, and I wanted to see if I could find out any more details as far as what was going on and what he was deemed, if he was still self-inflicted, and exactly kind of what was going on. So we went out and we went to the viewing of Johnny's body, and when we got there, not right away, but I spoke with the coroner at one opportunity, and she said that she thought it was really strange because Johnny when his body first arrived there, he was deemed self-inflicted, and then within a couple days, she got a phone call saying, like 2 to 3 days later, saying to change it from self-inflicted to homicide, and that the police were going to come out and dig a bullet out of his body.
Yeah.
And I knew that that they had him waiting for the police to come to dig the bullet out, and they weren't going to cremate him until they did that. But I just remember thinking a couple days, like, he was here already, and it was still considered self-inflicted. There still was no gun. And I remember just kind of thinking, like, how many days ago did I email them and tell them that the district attorney, was a family member and that he was going to be helping, and looking back on it now, it was like the timing was like almost perfect for.
It was like the next day.
Yeah, it was like the day after I told them that the district attorney was going to get involved. That
And suddenly it
they
gets
changed
changed
it.
to homicide, and they start digging the bullets out of his leg. That's
so that was interesting.
it's ironic timing.
No, I agree. And I remember the detectives asked if there was anything we could provide, like
Right.
any kind of information, because we were deep diving and we were making sure that they knew that we were going to make sure we got the truth and justice.
Right.
So we did. We sent over whatever information we did have. One thing that we ended up coming across was on somebody's comment or somebody's status about Johnny being murdered. The guy that Point Dexter said made the phone call, the 911 call, Brian M., that man made a comment under somebody's status and said something along the lines of, what happened to Johnny?
Yeah.
So that told us, wait, maybe he wasn't the one who called 911. And we later reached out to him, and we did confirm he didn't call 911.
Right.
So I don't know how his name got on the police report, but that was
Can I interject
one of the
something
things.
real quick?
Oh, yes.
It wasn't just his name on the police report. It was his height, his weight, and his address. And by the way, it was an old address, his birthday. everything about him was on the police report. And when I spoke with him, he told me that's an old address. And he was like so confused and concerned, like, do I need to go to the police? Will it help the investigation? He had no idea why his name would be on that report. It was confusing to him. So
And to us too.
well, yeah, it was a strange time, and I remember just being so grateful that Mary and her friend Jen were being so helpful and so active and looking into things, because we would have never seen that if it wouldn't
Yeah.
have been for Jen and Mary.
It felt like
I mean,
everybody
no one,
looked at us like
like-
we were crazy at some point, and
Yeah.
and I mean maybe
Like we were disturbing the
maybe,
investigation.
yeah, maybe we were a little pushy, but we needed to be, because if we are not going to advocate for Johnny, then who else will? If not for his family and people who love him the most, then who else will?
Yeah, amen.
Right.
It's true. Thank
No,
you.
I completely agree, and I would do it all over again. I would go a little more crazy.
Yep, me
All
too.
right.
Right. Well, now that you have a
Even
little more
more.
knowledge, we would know more what to do. At the time, it's like you don't know what to do. Your mind's going crazy. You have all this nervous energy. You can't sleep.
Right,
You're
and
thinking about him constantly.
And how many hours did we look people up on the internet? Did we go onto his Facebook and go through of all of his messages and his Google Maps and his Google Photos and look at the timestamps on everything and read how many messages? And what else did the detectives do that?
Well, no, they asked us for help well, something like that. Yeah,
They asked us for help. What?
kind of. They asked me to send them some of the information.
Yeah, why didn't they do it themselves? Why do we have all of those things with us and we're having to do all of this?
All right.
This
well,
isn't our.
Let's talk about
Sorry.
the case a little more. And okay, that's all right.
It just makes me
Right.
angry.
No, I'm
I get
glad.
you're mad. I get you're mad.
I'm glad we did do that. I'm glad and that comment really began a whole new investigation.
That's
Because
right.
at that point, from talking to Point Dexter, he made us believe kind of Brian M was the quiet one or Quiet Brian, and we just assumed he was next door because we had heard that Quiet Brian was next door. But since now we have two Brians, so we just decided to go through everything, kind of take a step back. So we did. We looked at the photos Aunt Michelle took at the crime scene that night, and one of the photos of the neighbor's house was, I think it was Aunt Michelle. She pointed it out that there was his mailbox,
Yeah.
and his mailbox had a different last name. It wasn't
Yep.
the M last name. It was Dunnan.
Yeah.
So
And then, you know what? Can I
Yeah.
say one thing? So I remember looking, you guys told me that name, and we're like, can you find anything else about this name? And so I looked it up, and I remember the email address. His email address for Brian Dunnan was the Quiet Brian.
Or the quiet one.
No, it was the Quiet Brian.
Yeah. Wow.
And that just, I still get goosebumps thinking about it.
I remember that, yeah. And then I searched up his picture on Facebook to see if he had a Facebook, and sure enough, he was my brother's friend.
Yep.
I saw his messages with my brother.
Yep.
And my brother sent him something like a tutorial how to fix your starter in the Range Rover. Like, Johnny,
Fix
Where,
the car
like,
that he
you would
went
help
missing
him
in
with
or
it.
took off in.
Right.
Yep.
right. And then so when I did look up his Facebook, I saw his profile picture was him holding a revolver with his sunglasses on.
Yep.
And then later, I ended up Googling Brian Dunnan, Parker, Arizona, and what came up was interesting because it was a Facebook post from La Paz County Sheriff, and it said suspected drug dealer Brian Dunnan, but when you click on it, the page won't show up. Like,
That's
it's
weird.
just the link, and then it just goes to the sheriff's department Facebook. So it was very strange.
Yeah.
I can tell
but
you.
it gave us a
sorry.
lot of information. That one photo that Aunt Michelle took, like, if we
Right.
didn't have that,
Well, and then for you to, like, when you looked him up, Mary, and you sent me the picture, like, you and I it was almost like we had this epiphany all together, like we were talking about it and we had this epiphany, like, there might be two Brians. Like, we had this epiphany, and then we found that the picture on the mailbox, and then you send me the picture of Brian, and that's when I got goosebumps. Alyssa got goosebumps, seeing that he was the quiet one. But what gave me the goosebumps was seeing him with the gun. like that gun.
Mhm.
It was creepy. You know, he has his profile picture. The main
It's out there
picture was
too. If
him
you
with the
guys look it
gun.
up, if you
Yeah,
look it up,
it's gonna.
Brian Dunn, and it's there. You could see the
He
picture with
took
the
it down.
revolver.
He changed his profile
It
picture.
doesn't matter if his picture's there. We posted it
Yeah,
everywhere.
it's on Johnny's. Well,
It's if you look it up, and the news reports will show the picture with the gun as well.
and we're gonna post it again on his page on Justice
Right.
for Johnny Beckham, and then you can see the pictures of Brian.
Right. And also, if it, just to keep a lookout for him, if you guys can look him up and look up the picture of him, keep a lookout. He has family in Whittier,
Yeah.
California.
And also, we think there's ties to Blythe,
Mhm.
and of course Parker. So at this point, yeah, we had found out that there was two Bryans. So what was interesting was that I had been out in Parker for Johnny's viewing, and oh no, I'm sorry, it was after the viewing, and I was speaking with Detective Poindexter, and he pointed out that that there was that they were looking for the wrong Brian, and basically said we had the wrong Brian, and he was like, you sent something, like, oh, so that's how they figured it out. Like, that was scary to me. That was really scary
Right.
because his name was on the mailbox.
Yep.
So that's a little scary.
Right, I agree, and it wasn't. I think it was the next day after that that the detectives. I mean, honestly, they did more in those couple days that we knew they were assigned to the case than anybody did prior to. But I think it was that next day on July 7th they put out a flyer, wanted for questioning, on the La Paz County Sheriff's Department page or
Right.
Facebook page,
Yep.
and so it was 100% confirmed that Brian's the neighbor. Brian is Quiet Brian, or Brian Dunnan's Quiet Brian, and that's who they're looking for.
Yep.
Right. So it was Brian Dunnan, and the timeline was a bit confusing, but there was a lot of good information that we were given, and there were some leads, and people were really trying to help us, and that was good. But I looked at the police report at one point, and I saw the girl's name. I'm going to say her name is Kay, that was there that night, that was going to meet Johnny that night. She sent me the text messages, all their back and forth. Johnny was around the corner. He's coming over to meet her. She's getting gas. He tells her, wait a few minutes, I'm coming. And then she drives up on the scene, and she sees the sheriff's there, and she keeps going and drives up the hill, and she can see that he's shining his light on the ground, shining his light on Johnny's truck. And then when she sees an ambulance comes, she goes back down and comes upon the scene.
And she had her kids in her car, so she didn't want them to see what was going on either, I don't think.
I'm not sure of that, but yeah, there was a reason. She just wasn't, like, she was a little nervous about being there, but she had kind of a bad feeling.
Yeah.
So, so she came up on the scene, and then she saw some people leaving, and she said one did look like Theron's picture, but she doesn't know Theron, so she wasn't sure. She didn't want to say 100%, but she said at the end of the street, she stopped to talk to them, and she mentioned to them what happened, and they said, we don't know. There's an ambulance, and somebody over there on Dreamy Lane, and she said the guy that kind of looked like Theron went to the right, which would have been consistent with the neighbor's story of him cutting over that way, and the other guy, bigger guy, went to the left. And so that's what she's seen. But she also mentioned, the first time I ever talked to her, she mentioned that she was in a relationship with a guy who was abusive, and she had children with him, and she was kind of concerned about if he had any involvement. She literally said, she was kind of concerned, but she said that his brother was a sheriff, and that kind of bothered me, especially we were hearing some rumors. Mary, do you remember any of the rumors you were hearing?
Yeah, we were hearing a lot of rumors, but some of them that stuck out was that Johnny's murder may have been officer involved, and the more we heard about the first responding sheriff, the more anxious we got about that rumor. We were told that multiple complaints were filed on him, but just for Johnny's case. Like, multiple people were complaining about the way he handled Johnny's case.
Yep.
We also heard that he was demoted from sergeant to patrol officer.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, even speaking, if he is patrol, I remember telling the detectives, I think it was the detectives, that Johnny's house was being stolen from, and that they were planning on stealing from uh, his house at the when everybody was at the funeral. And so we asked, do you think maybe you could, keep an eye on the house, maybe stay around that area? And they said they didn't have enough patrol officers to keep an eye on his house. But keep in mind, Johnny lives right next to the person that's wanted for questioning. Like,
Yeah,
I would think
for murder.
that they would, yeah, for murder.
Well,
And I would think,
go ahead.
yeah, he was wanted for questioning at that time.
Right.
So you would think that they would want to sit on that house just in case he came back, or
And it's
you
not
know.
like,
Well, and
in
then
their
what
own words, it's not like there's a bunch of murders going on. There's not. It's not
in
like
their own
that's
words.
what in their own words exactly. There's not like there's a bunch of crime taking place. It's a small town. There's plenty enough officers. I'm sure.
There's sheriffs and police officers,
There's
so
three
and they work together.
There's
There's 3 departments.
yeah,
Right.
In
and it's a
mile by
small
mile
town.
And they used the murder. There was a murder in Baus just before this, and they used that as an excuse for, not having enough people or whatever. But the real thing that was really disturbing to us was when the Range Rover that was parked at Brian's house. I believe it was like July 6th when I was there. And I took a picture of it. I went back to Brian's house. I started taking more pictures. Now knowing that he was probably the main suspect, it disappeared.
Yep, the car's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
He came back and grabbed his car and got his car and took off in it.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
disturbing.
And that was how many
100
days after,
Right.
after Johnny's murder?
Go ahead, Mary. Sorry.
Yeah, this is no, you're fine. 7 days after, or 6 days after Johnny's murder. This was right when the wanted for questioning flyer came out.
Right.
So
Yep.
100% this case was mishandled.
Yep.
Like, there's no denying it. And I think Michelle, you even told Potts about that, right?
About I did. I emailed him and told him that I have a picture of the vehicle on that date, and now it's gone. And they were basically like, "We're aware." Okay.
Yeah.
Like, why weren't you sitting on the house? Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
to
And
me.
then they find out there's going to be a burglary and they're not going to want to watch. They don't want to come and see. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot I want to say, but I can't.
I mean, there's a lot of suspicion around Brian, clearly, because he disappeared. But sometimes people disappear because they have other priors, I'd say. But according to Poindexter that day when Mary and I were speaking with him, he didn't have, he didn't have anything on him. So,
But he's wanted now for murder.
Well,
It's not
we're
just
gonna get into
questioning him.
that,
I
but
know.
yeah.
I'm just saying because we're running out of time.
well, we have time. We're going to bring Mary back again in 2 more weeks. So
Right.
next week we'll go over Alyssa's story, and then we'll be bringing Mary back again in 2 more weeks. At this point, Mary, we have about 5 more minutes. Do you want to read the poem that Johnny wrote and give us a little bit of background about that poem?
Yeah, I would love to read the poem. Gosh, he was amazing. But this poem, my sister, she ended up putting on the back of the pamphlets that she made for Johnny's memorial. Yeah, it was written by Johnny, and we just really feel like it relates to his story. And you'll see why in the next episode. There's so many moving parts to this story. It's unfortunate that it's 3 episodes long, but there's so much that we felt like needed to be said. But the poem goes, alone, he stood up for what he knew was right, even as everyone turned their backs in fear of consequence. He instantly became the hero whose shoes nobody could fill as he exhausted his last breath. Courageous, brave, and innocent legends are remembered. Live not fearing death, but embracing the beauty of life you possess.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Written
awesome.
by Johnny Beckham.
I remember I couldn't believe when I read that. I couldn't believe. I was like, wow, Johnny wrote that? I thought it was something that you guys found online or something. But yeah, it was amazing.
Johnny and Jody, my brother, were very poetic and
Right.
very good at writing music, songs, and poetry.
He's a great artist.
Yeah, very smart and highly intelligent. Very smart.
I agree. Beautiful souls too. I mean,
Yeah.
And both gone so soon.
Both died young. Yeah. If you please look us up on Facebook at Justice for Johnny Beckham, Beckham. Also, you can also look for Dying to Get Well on Facebook, and we also are now on YouTube under KCAA Radio for YouTube. I just want to say thank you to Mary for joining us, and I have one more announcement. I wanted to announce that there's going to be an event on Thursday, April 7th. It's with Kids with Kindness. If you recall, Kids with Kindness is an organization that helps homeless people or people in need, and we make care packages, and you can take them in your vehicle. We do it for pets and has water bottles. We do it for people and pets. And Kids for Kindness is going to be having an event on Thursday, April 7th. It's a Big Queen Bingo, and it's going to be at Hamburger Mary's in Ontario. For more information, go on to their Facebook page for Kids with Kindness, or you can go on kidswithkindness.org, and that will be on April 7th rather, and they need, at least 50 people, and it's $25 suggested donation, and you'll be playing bingo, and it's a lot of fun, and also they are also going to be doing raffles. So I think that's about it for our show for today. Thank you for listening to KCAA 102.3 FM, 1050 AM, and 106.5 FM. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
thank you.
Bye,
You too.
Mary.
Bye, Mayor.
Southern California's KCAA, the #1